Okay, so have you ever stopped to think, like, what if everything we think we know about reality is, like, totally wrong?
I see where you're going with this.
Like, scientists are always saying, 97% of the universe is all this dark energy and dark matter.
Right, stuff we can't even see or detect directly.
Exactly. It's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it. Like, what's really out there,
Yeah, it really makes you question everything, doesn't it? Like, what else is going on that we're just completely oblivious to?
Totally, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into today, this whole idea of reality being way more than what we see.
You found this amazing conversation between Deepak Chopra and Dr. Mayim Bialik.
Yeah, on her podcast, Breakdown.
It's like a deep dive into all these big questions.
Yeah.
Consciousness, the nature of reality, human potential.
And I thought it would be really cool to, like, break down the most interesting parts,
Right, for people who are curious about this stuff but maybe don't have time to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that really jumped out at me was this idea from quantum physics that the universe might actually be made of nothing.
Oh, okay. That's a big one.
Right. So basically, Chopra was talking about how these tiny particles that make up everything, they only become like solid things when we observe them.
Oh, I've heard about this. It's like they exist as waves of possibility until someone's looking at them.
Yeah, and then they like collapse into a specific location. It's so bizarre.
It's like our observation is what makes them real in a way.
Right. So then what does that mean for like everything else? Like this table or us even? Are we all just like waves of potential until someone's looking?
That's a pretty wild thought, isn't it? It really makes you wonder about the role of consciousness in all of this.
Exactly. So that's what we're going to try to unpack today. Like, what is this thing called consciousness and how does it shape the reality we experience?
And Chopra had some really interesting things to say about that.
So to kick things off, he started by talking about how little we actually know about the universe.
Like how much is still a complete mystery to us?
Yeah, he said something like 70% of it is dark energy, which is pushing the universe to expand faster and faster.
And then another 27% is dark matter, which we can't even see, but we know it's there because of its gravity.
Right, so that leaves only 3% for all the stuff we can actually see and interact with, like stars and planets and us.
But here's the crazy part. Even within that tiny 3%, almost all of it is just interstellar dust.
Like invisible dust particles floating around in space.
Yeah, so all the galaxies and stars that we see are actually just a tiny fraction of that 3%. It makes it something like 0.1%.
It's mind-blowing, right? And then on top of that, even the atoms that make up that tiny fraction, they're mostly empty space.
Right, and the particles within those atoms, they act like waves when we're not looking at them.
So Chopra's point is that when you really get down to it, the universe is mostly made of nothing.
It's like this vast ocean of potential, and we're just these tiny little ripples on the surface.
Yeah, and that brings us to what he calls the hard problem of consciousness.
Which is basically like, how does all this nothingness create our inner world of thoughts and feelings and experiences?
Right, like how do we go from particles and waves to the feeling of being you?
Yeah, the question that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
And Chopra even suggests that the universe might be like a cosmic dream or a simulation generated by something outside of space and time.
Almost like we're living in a giant computer program.
Right, and everything we perceive is just different combinations of information or like zeros and ones.
Which is interesting because it kind of echoes this idea from ancient mystical traditions that reality is an illusion.
Yeah, Chopra draws a lot of parallels between modern science and ancient wisdom.
Like he sees them as converging on a similar understanding of the universe.
And this is where AI comes in.
Because AI is all about processing information too, right?
Exactly. And Chopra thinks that AI is almost like a reflection of the fundamental nature of reality.
But he's also careful to point out that consciousness is different from just information processing.
Right. He says consciousness is like the thing that's doing the perceiving.
It's not something you can just create with algorithms.
No, he says it's boundless and timeless.
It's like the source of everything.
Yeah, and he quotes this physicist, Freeman Dyson, who said, God is what the mind becomes when it goes beyond the threshold of our comprehension.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. It's like this ultimate mystery that we might never fully understand.
And that brings us to one of the most powerful ideas in the whole interview. That seeing is not believing, believing is seeing.
Oh, wow. Okay, break that down for me.
So Chopra's point is that our beliefs shape how we perceive the world.
Like we see what we expect to see.
Exactly. Our conditioning from childhood, our culture, our upbringing, all of it creates these filters in our minds.
And those filters determine what we notice and how we interpret things.
He gives this fascinating example of kittens that were raised in environments with only horizontal or vertical lines.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And when they grew up, they could only see the world in those orientations.
Like their brains literally couldn't process the other direction.
It's like our beliefs can actually change the physical structure of our brains.
That's pretty profound.
Right. So what Chopra's saying is that we're not just passive observers of reality. we're actively creating it with our beliefs.
So if we believe the world is a scary place, we're going to see danger everywhere.
But if we believe the world is full of love and abundance, that's what we'll experience.
It's like that quote from the poet William Blake, "We are led to believe a lie when we see with and not through the eye."
Exactly. So the question is, what beliefs are we holding on to that might be limiting our experience of reality?
And that leads to another really interesting point that Chopra makes about the potential emergence of a new human species.
Like a metahuman or something.
Yeah, he thinks that with all the advancements in AI and the increasing amount of information we're exposed to, our brains are literally evolving.
He calls it epigenetic modulation, which means that our environment and experiences can actually switch our genes on and off.
Like, think about how much time we spend on our phones and computers now.
It's constantly shaping our neural networks.
And Chopra thinks that this could lead to all sorts of changes in human capabilities.
Like heightened intuition or even telepathy.
Yeah, he even tells this story about a young boy who could read his mother's mind.
Like literally type out what she was thinking.
And Chopra thinks that this is an example of what he calls non-local correlation.
Which is like how two quantum particles can be linked even when they're separated by vast distances.
So he's basically saying that our minds might be connected in a similar way.
Like we're all part of this one universal consciousness.
Which is a pretty mind-blowing idea.
Right. And it kind of ties into a lot of ancient spiritual teachings about the interconnectedness of all things.
So how do we tap into this deeper level of awareness?
Well, Chopra gave this really simple exercise during the interview.
Yeah, he asked Jonathan if he was enjoying the conversation.
And then he told him to just hold on to the answer for a few seconds.
And in that space between the question and the answer, there was this sense of pure presence.
Like a stillness in the mind.
And Chopra said, that's what he calls God's mind, the silence from which all thoughts arise.
So he's saying that if we can quiet our minds, we can access this deeper level of awareness.
And he also talked about how yoga and meditation can help us do that.
Because they're all about cultivating inner stillness and focus.
Right. It's not just about the physical postures. It's about training the mind.
And finally, Chopra touched on the possibility of extraterrestrial life.
Yeah, he seems to think it's pretty much a given.
Which is interesting because more and more scientists are starting to believe that too.
Right. He even brought up the concept of the multiverse.
Like the idea that there are infinite parallel universes out there.
And that each of us might have countless versions of ourselves living in those other universes.
It's getting pretty trippy now.
I know, right? But it's also kind of exciting to think about all the possibilities.
So what are some key takeaways from all of this?
Well, for me, the biggest one was definitely that seeing is not believing. Believing is seeing.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that we're not just observing reality, we're creating it with our thoughts and beliefs.
And if we want to experience a different reality, we need to change our beliefs.
Another takeaway was Chopra's prediction about the emergence of a new human species.
Yeah, that really got me thinking about the potential of human evolution.
And how our increasing interaction with AI might be accelerating that process.
And on a more practical level, I really liked that simple exercise he gave for experiencing presence.
Yeah, just noticing that gap between a thought and its expression.
It's a great way to cultivate more mindfulness in our daily lives.
So what does all this mean for our listeners?
Well, I think it suggests that there's way more to reality than we realize.
And that we have the power to shape our experience of it with our thoughts and beliefs.
If we can tap into the infinite potential of consciousness, we can unlock new levels of creativity and intuition.
And who knows, maybe we'll even develop some of those extraordinary abilities that Chopra was talking about.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Are we on the verge of a major evolutionary leap as a species?
With all the advancements in AI, and our growing understanding of consciousness, are we becoming something more than human?
And if so, what role will each of us play in this transformation?
It's definitely something to ponder, isn't it?
Absolutely.